Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 55th episode of your favorite 3M channel. And tonight, I'm privileged to welcome our dear brother and minister Ron Taylor back. For tonight, we have prepared more of his extraordinary paranormal and supernatural experiences, both with God and with demonic forces. But before we start going into more of those eyewitness reports, Ron, welcome back, brother. Thank you for finding time for the audience and myself. And for the sake of introduction, can you please remind the audience by sharing something important and interesting about yourself? Thank you.
Sure. First of all, thanks for the re-invite. Really appreciate it. Great to be on with you guys and your audience. Yeah, sure. We're my wife and I are from the Toronto area. We've been in ministry since '91, um, publicly, officially, unofficially for a lot longer than that. But um, co-pastored the downtown Toronto vineyard, and then we experienced the experiences of '94 and helping out at TACF at the time called TACF. And from those experiences, went on the road for a while in the '90s and wound up back in business in software um, for the early part of the 2000s, and for the last I guess roughly 10 years been helping a good friend of ours planting a church. And I guess the official term would be something similar to an associate pastor, but we don't use those terms with our group. Anyways, that is something, I guess, a bit of a bite of, and also like a long time ago, was professional musician back in the crazy '70s, and semi-pro ever since, through the church and different experiences that way. So um, also counseling background, so a bit of a mutt experience wise, but it all kind of congeals and comes together for experiences, and something you can kind of bring out onto the table and let God use in various ways depending on the situation. So been a cool ride so far.
Yeah, based on the previous episode you and I did, and all those experiences, and I would just invite the audience. I can post that link for everyone again, so you guys can watch. In that episode, Ron was talking about God protecting him from the demonic powers on the highway when him and his wife were heading from Canada to the States, making them invisible. Then how he saw a huge cherub on the airport, then different, then communicating with the angels, all these different things that you will say, okay, but how are these stories so long? Because every story has a sub story, and every story has a
Yeah.
parallel other story that when you combine and when you listen to them, it brings you so much of amazement of this spiritual invisible realm that many times we just read about it in the Bible, but we don't always encounter personally. So then when someone like Ron in his ministry experienced that, there's so much of this wealth of information and knowledge and experience that we can learn from someone like them. So it will be always good to go back and for the previous episode and learn what Ron was going through. And for tonight, he has prepared some other powerful testimonies with God. And maybe as the first story, Ron, can you please start when you dealt with principalities over particular states in America, including Pennsylvania and Georgia? And maybe we can start by if you can please explain what are these principalities, because for
Mhm.
people who are not into the unseen realm, Dr. Heiser's work, the divine
Right.
council and the fallen entities, they only know about God, angels, demons, and they don't know about anything in between. So can we please start by you telling us what are the principalities, and then tell us about these stories in Pennsylvania and Georgia, please?
Sure. My first temptation is to say, do you have an extra 8 or 9 hours? But in a nutshell, I guess an overview would be a very simplistic um, explanation. The originator of all things is God, and so when we discover not only who He is, but how He has orchestrated His creation, and how He has orchestrated the invisible that we don't see, but is His kingdom extended, how He's orchestrated and who He's created, what He's created within that realm. Once we start getting an idea even of what that looks like, or what parts of it is, or parts of it are, it allows us to get an idea and a feel for what the enemy, for what Satan has set up, because Satan really all he can do is copy. Can you still hear me? Okay. So for the most part, all he can really be about is coming up with a copy. And so just as there is a holy trinity, there is also a satanic trinity, and we find that out blatantly in Revelation, even though it's not about the revelation of Satan. It's about the revelation of Jesus Christ, and we learn that in the first verse. um, there we learn about that satanic trinity, Satan himself, the false prophet, as a reflection of the Holy Spirit, and the Antichrist as a reflection of Jesus. So there's that mirror image, and just as we know of angels, there are demons. They're not who we think they are. Again, that's another topic for another show. But there is also a hierarchy within God's kingdom, angelic hierarchy, and that also exists to a great degree in Satan's kingdom. And if he opens up the invisible realm to anyone, there is a principle that applies, and I don't hear a lot of teaching on this. But if he opens up, we always think, well, I just want to see angels. Maybe somebody gets stirred from either hearing the last podcast or somebody else speak about it, and they, Father, I want to see angels. Well, you don't know what you're praying for, because if you see one realm, you see both realms. When that curtain, when Father raises the curtain, so to speak, between the two realms, it's all fair game. And so it is something that just needs to be, you just need to be aware of, and it's nothing to be fearful about. I mean, we need to understand. Are we in a warfare? Of course we are, but it's already been won. uh, and that's something else to just, I'm going to drop this for free. George Eldon Ladd. You need to write that name down. George Eldon Ladd. He was a professor at Fuller Theological, and he he had a statement that the kingdom of God is now, but not yet, all at the same time. And the example he would use was in World War II, when all the planning for D-Day was done and they were ready to initiate going and invading France, the shores of France and Normandy. There is a sense in which after D-Day, So we'll just call it the day after D-Day. The end of the war was won on D-Day, but it wasn't yet. And that's the sense of the kingdom. And so the battle has been won. We know what the end of the book is. We know what the end of the story is. And because of the work of Christ, we know that it's finished. However, that's that, but then it's not yet. So it's already done, it's already accomplished, but it's also not yet. So we just need to be aware of these things, and we're being affected by the invisible realm. It just makes sense that it's available for us to experience visually. And once again, I said it quite often in the first podcast. I'll say it probably again quite often in this one, and that is nothing about what we're going to talk about makes me or my wife special. Nothing. This is for the everyday Ed Schmidlap. I don't care what your background is. He speaks through donkeys, so it really doesn't matter who you are. It's got nothing to do with what you haven't done and what you have done. It's got everything to do with your relationship with Father. That's what Jesus came for, was to give you a relationship with his Father. And that's what it's all about. And so based on that relationship, there's things we have access to. And one of them is this whole unseen realm. And knowing that Father is drawing us to that, and also knowing that the battle's been won, should give us some peace and some safety going through some interesting times. Principalities and powers, Paul talked about, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, and then outlined principalities and powers in high places. And so there is this hierarchy. So principalities tend to be, and again, I'm speaking in generalities, tend to be over areas, geographical areas. Sometimes it's a state or a province. Sometimes it's just a city. But predominantly, it's more often a state. It can be a city, it can be a state, it can be a province, it can be a country. 3 different principality types. Okay, already in the discussion, and they all have a particular job to do. They have a role that they play. And unless we are aware of their existence and we ask Father to tell us what that role is, then we're operating blind. And there, it just is. It's been our experience. And we've had part of our experience when we were traveling in ministry was to indicate to some of the pastors that we were coming in contact with what that information was, and saying, here's what we see. We're strangers in this area. You guys live here. This is what we heard Father tell us. Does that make sense to you? Is that confirmation of what you've been kind of from a gut feeling, all that kind of thing? And almost invariably, we would say what we got on the way to that particular area, and there might be multiple pastors that would be able to respond to us over the time we were in the state, and they would say often, wow, that puts into a nutshell the things that we were thinking about, but we just didn't have a way to articulate what it was. And so that's the operation that we were taking part in. And so it was really cool just to be able to download some of that information to the pastors, on, so to speak, boots on the ground in that area, and then move on to another area and start all over again. Okay, Father, what are you doing? My wife was a big, and again, this is more than you asked for, but my wife was a big proponent of of something that redirected how we approached this whole information thing. At early days, and this is probably very similar to a lot of people who step into this kind of a mode. You want to know what the enemy's doing in an area, and you get into this mindset of we have to find out what the enemy's doing in this area, and then download that information to the pastors, because that'll be really helpful to them. And while that's true, the information that's even more helpful to those ministers is what Father's doing in the area. so so we'd be driving along in early days. I'd be asking out loud. We'd just been praying together out loud. What are you doing and what's happening and what do we need to know and all that kind of stuff. And hearing what we hear and talking about it. And this one trip, my wife Sigrid said, "You know what? I don't want to know what the enemy's doing in where we're about to go. Let's experiment. I do not want to know what the enemy's doing. I only want to know what Father's doing. So let's just try and figure out what he's up to." Jesus did never, ever did Jesus say, "I want to do what I see the opposite of what I see the enemy doing." He only said ever, "I only do and say and speak what I see the Father saying and doing and speaking." So let's have that, and that altered everything for us. When we started paying more attention to what Father was up to, still coming into the awareness of what the enemy was up to, but that was only because Father told us in the midst of telling us what he was up to. And so then it would be on a need to know basis, right?
Yeah, thank you for that explanation, especially for people who are not, familiar with this principalities.
Right.
Before you start giving your, maybe examples, what happened in Georgia and Pennsylvania, what is your opinion when it comes to these principalities? Are they all evil and rebellious, or do you think there's still some good ones, including, our archangels and beings of that sort? Do you think there's still those principalities are faithful to God?
Oh, definitely. And again, they're the originals.
Yeah, like
And
Michael, right?
yes, yes. So you have archangels like Gabriel and Michael. And by the way, the third one originally was Lucifer, right? Um, so there are two archangels that we are now aware of in Father's kingdom, and um, together with those two archangels, back up. It would first of all seem the most often that we see Michael is in a warfare type of setting, and most often when we see Gabriel, it's an information download. Um, so there's roles, which is the point there, and then there are terms that we see specifically in the King James, seraphim and cherubim. The I am on the end just means plural, so a seraph or a cherub would be the singular, and they tend to have unique roles. Um, the seraph is a unique one for me, because if you go into the Jewish tradition, they're not all that great. They're not on the enemies in the enemy's kingdom, but the way that they're described within the oral tradition of the Jewish rabbis, uh, they sometimes have a Cheshire cat grin on when they're talking about, if you ask them about a seraph, because these guys, in their view, the seraphs in their oral traditions sometimes were pranksters. Sometimes they would play jokes on people. It was all well-meaning, but it wasn't anything getting done proper, that kind of thing. So that I'm only adding for the confusion here, because there's all kinds of oral tradition within the Christian community, and we have to be able to discern. We need fathers' ability to discern. And so when you're trying to study this, I would implore you to be very similar to the woman who pulled on Jesus, the hem of Jesus' garment. That is the dogged determination that you need to go after Father for the truth. It's all well and good to hear all the different traditions, but when you're doing that, you go through those, you consume those the same way you consume chicken. Used to have a pastor who would jokingly tell the congregation that Mr. and Miss Sister and Brother so and so tried to kill me last night. They had me over to their house, and I swear to you, they tried to kill me. They fed me chicken, and it had bones in it. But thankfully, I was able to just to eat the meat and spit out the bones. That is the approach to be taken. And this topic that we're on, especially, is that kind of topic. Do your homework. Don't just listen to anything and anyone. Do your homework. Do your research. Because there's a lot of it out there, and it's all fascinating, but it's not all Father's truth. It's the old story, there's three sides to any to any story. There's his side, there's her side, and there's the truth. And that's what you're looking for, right?
Thank you. So when it comes to one of your ministry travels with your spouse from Canada to the States, something extraordinary happened on at least a couple of your trips when it comes to this regional principality that is a fallen one, not one of those good guys, but one of the
Right.
rebellious ones. And this happened in at least two states, in Pennsylvania and Atlanta, Georgia. Can you please tell us what happened in these two states?
Sure, I'd love to. So I'll start with Pennsylvania, because it was really, I think, the first one that that I experienced. And once again, driving along, and you know how on a long drive, places and things start to, I guess it's the hum of the road, and the lines on the road start to mesmerize you a bit. And my mind wandered a bit. I started, when it did that in those days, and even now, I'll do the same thing. I'm paying attention to what I'm doing, but my mind is asking Father, what's up? Like I know you talk, I know you're always talking, and I'm not always listening. It's not you, it's me. And so, is there something that I need to hear as we're driving? And so I would be kind of going along, and all of a sudden, again, here come the angels. I'm just kind of thinking out loud, that kind of those kinds of things to Father, but I get the answer from the angels, and the lead voice of the group at that point said, Ron, I know, I got to back up. I kind of started looking around. I'm thinking, man, I haven't seen a speed sign for a long time. Not only that, I don't even know what state we're in. I know we should be coming into Pennsylvania if we're not already in it. And so I started thinking, I need to know what speed I need to be doing. That was at the moment where the answer came from the angel. Well, I can tell you, you need to slow your vehicle down to 55 miles an hour. Precisely. I said, well, okay, then 55 it is. So here we go, 55. Now, my wife noticed the deceleration, and it kind of woke her out of that same state. And she said, "So that was unique." And I said, I'll come back to you. I'm still in the midst of a conversation here, so just hold your horses. I'll get to you." And so we go on a little ways, and just a little, maybe a moment, a minute or two go by, and I said, "Okay, how long do you want me to stay on 55?" And and what I got was, you keep it at 55, and you lock it at 55, and that's where your attention needs to be. Other than the road, keep it at 55, pegged, and you're going to stay that way all the way through this state. And so I said, "Oh, this state. So you're not even going to say Pennsylvania?" And a giggle comes back, and he says, "Well, yeah, you're in Pennsylvania, but because of that, you need to stay at 55." I left it at that. I thought, in my little my impish thought at the moment there was, okay, if that's the case, then I'll wait to see a sign, right? I'm going to look for a sign, and then I'll know. I know what you said, but I'll that kind of thing. And I got nothing back with that. I find a sign finally, the speed limit 55, and it's Pennsylvania, right? So I'm thinking, okay, guys, you got my attention, right? So let's do this. Is it 50? Unless it says otherwise, I'm going to stay at 55 the whole time I'm in Pennsylvania. Is that right? And that I got a yes. And I said, okay, why? And the answer I got was really, really, at the time, boy, did it ever get my attention. Now it's a bit more. I'm more. I'll say I'm more used to it. It's still the surprise factor. We need to be awed at the information Father gives us. We should never be complacent. This is the one who created everything, who's actually pleased to talk with us, and pleased when we listen, and he's pleased to communicate. And the reason is communication. It's the fellowship. He wants community, fellowship with us, and he wants intimacy with us. And so the answer to why was, you're in the state of Pennsylvania, and the principality over this state is a legalist. And so if you go as many as 5 miles over the speed limit, you're going to get a ticket. So you need to stay right at 55. And I said, okay, so you said he's a legalist. Okay, so I know for a fact, because I've talked to several, that they don't, the ministers in Pennsylvania don't all do the speed limit. And I'm even more sure that their people don't all do the speed limit. Are you saying that by contravening the spirit, this principalities law, by contravening this principalities law, are you saying that Christians can get themselves into some gray areas here, and, as it were, enter the middle of a boxing ring with their hands down and their chin out? And he said, yeah, that's exactly right. A lot of people have been have gone through the repercussions of having contravened that principalities law, unknowing, but nonetheless, they contravened that law and suffered the consequences. and I heard suffered the consequences. So I'm saying, suffered the consequences. Are you talking about people getting sick, apart from accidents that could happen if you're going a little too fast, and the normal stuff that we would think of? Are you talking about people suffering the consequences from this principality of things happening in their families, things not happening or happening that aren't good in their church, things that are good not happening, and things that are not good happening in the ministers' churches or in the lives of the people? And he said, that's exactly right. If the people of the Lord in Pennsylvania would simply drive this, I know how this sounds. If they would simply drive the speed limit, they would live a better life. Things, in other words, would be better for them. But they're stepping into a realm they have no idea exists and getting themselves a repercussion simply because they're doing something as simple as speeding a few miles over the limit. Now, while that's happening, we enter a city, not Atlanta, or sorry, not Steel Town. It was a smaller city than Pittsburgh. So, but we were getting towards Pittsburgh at that point. Just smaller city, and so the speed limit was down a bit, and it was like 40. And I pegged it at 40. Effectively, we had more conversation, and it was about whatever the speed limit says. When you see the speed limit, you do that exact speed limit and don't go over it. So here I am. I'm pegged at about 40, and I see this woman behind me in a minivan, and I'm talking with Sigrid now. I'm bringing her up to speed, and while I'm telling her what I've been saying this past couple of minutes, this van comes out behind me, passes us, and I looked at my speedometer. I'm doing 40. She passed me at what I guess was about 45 because it wasn't fast and you couldn't hear it. She's driving a minivan. If those things, if you put the gas down, you can hear it, right? They struggle. So she was about 45. She no sooner got in front of us than a police officer pulled her over. Okay. Now, I don't know if it was if the police officer let her off. Obviously, we were still driving on. But the reality is she got pulled over for doing 5 miles an hour over the speed limit. And that was all I had to see. Now, fast forward. We get to the church outside of Pennsylvania that we were on the road to get to. And I'm relaying when the time is right, and I know they'll actually be able to hear what I'm saying. I'm telling the minister and relaying the story. And I said, does that jive with anything that, like, either you've heard from Pennsylvania ministers or even discovered yourself? And there was giggles and Cheshire cat grins all the way through, coming from this person as I was talking, and to a person that I've spoken to, American traveling ministry, especially this gentleman was he and his wife were the pastors of the church at the time that we went to, and he said, yeah, oh no, you're just putting into an experience and language within that experience that we know. We just weren't able to articulate it in the way that you're articulating it, but we all know that you in Pennsylvania do that. And now what we know, given what you're saying, he said, anybody I talk to, I will tell what you heard. That if you just obeyed the speed limit, things would go a lot better in that state for you. Then I spoke later, about a year later, to 6 months to a year later to a regional overseer. Okay, and he was also a traveling minister. Was in he was in relationship with over 100 churches, and inside the vineyard and outside the vineyard. And so he was a resource for me. I phoned him and I talked to him about this, and he was laughing out loud through the whole story. Thought it was absolutely the funniest thing he'd ever heard of. And I thought he was going to tell me I was completely insane and I must have lost my marbles. But what he did tell me, he didn't go there at all. He said, Ron, reason why I'm laughing is because, again, you articulated in language I have not yet heard anyone else say, but it's brilliant because Father told me that there was a principality over Pennsylvania, and that principality was a legalist. Now, that's all he said to me. But what you're adding to the picture makes everything make a lot more sense. And he said, now when I'm in that state, talking to the people I'm in relationship with, the ministers I'm in relationship with, I can give them the rest of the story. So yeah, that was pretty cool. Obviously never forgot that one.
I have two questions before you switch to Georgia, Atlanta.
Yep.
These two questions are related to your experience in Pennsylvania. First, if this rebelling principality is against God and therefore hates people, is against people, why would it care if people follow the rule of going 55 and not above? Because I would imagine it would be in its or their interests for so many people to go above the speed limit so they would get into car accidents. It shouldn't be in their interest for people to slow down. That sounds, at first I don't understand that, because I would
Yeah.
imagine, yeah, like, don't worry, go over 100, don't worry, just you only have one
Right.
life, just go and enjoy yourself, like enjoy the ride. That's the first question. The second question is, I also don't understand when you said maybe 15-20 minutes ago that this principality, particularly in Pennsylvania, may have, even on people of God and ministers, may have impact on their churches, lives. So forget about the speeding ticket, but even more
Right.
like spiritual consequences. And I don't understand that either, because we're under the rulership and of Yahweh God, and we belong to Him. So these attacks shouldn't affect us, because Yahweh Elohim is way stronger than local principality. So if you can please touch on that. And the first thing, why would the principality care if we go 55 and not 105? Because then we will get killed. Like, it should be in their interest for us to get killed. Like, I don't understand those two things.
Well, I actually agree with you on both counts. In terms of the questions and the questioning, the first one, yes, it's counterintuitive on the surface, completely counterintuitive. But it's also something that you start to see in Satan's realm. It doesn't all make sense on his side. It just doesn't. And to try and make sense of something that there's, I wouldn't call it nonsensical, because that's the one thing you don't want to do with the enemy is you don't want to take it for granted. You don't want to take him for granted, and you don't want to underestimate what is available for him to do. Don't ever underestimate that. Yes, he's under our feet, but again, you remember, it is, but not yet. That is a very important concept to remember, especially when we're talking about this topic. Because on one hand, yes, we are completely protected by Father, completely protected by Father. But how does that explain what David went through? Right? So there is a sense here. It doesn't destroy his sovereignty, and it's not about our free will within that. His sovereignty is unshakable, unmovable, and it is a complete non-negotiable. However, within that, he has created a world where currently sin is unfolding. And the effects of the fall are continuing to unfold. Now, yes, his son ends all of that. But if you've noticed, trees are still dying. People still die. The air has death in it. It's not always healthy to breathe. And so the effects of sin on the world, all creation groans and waits for the revealing of the sons of God. We're not sons yet, but we are. We are, but not yet. So there is a sense in which Father allows things to happen. Sometimes things happen not because a demon or a disembodied spirit of some kind or something from his realm is affecting anything. Sometimes he nor any of his kingdom is even close to us, and bad stuff happens. Well, why? Not because somebody or something was directing it. Father allowed it, but it was for his purposes and his reasons. But he didn't necessarily bring it our way. Sometimes things happen because we live in a fallen world. It just is what it is. And so we can't forget that part of a possibility. Now, when somebody like in what the angels were telling me with this guy, this principality was doing in Pennsylvania, why he was doing it that way, he is a legalist. Right? That was the first piece of information. This guy is a legalist. And so he's going to choose a law and he's going to dance all over it. He's not going to choose the whole law book. He's more than likely going to choose a law and dance all over it. Now, sometimes there are principalities that do take the whole law book, and that's how their legalism operates. Now, when that happens, you usually end up with ministers who will unwittingly be affected by that atmosphere and literally walk out in their churches a legalistic approach. I'll just drop that one and run.
No, that's a good, like, you're making connections I will not be able to make. And I'm thinking, wow, just from one sentence you just said, there can be a whole article or a sermon or like
Yes.
a research paper or essay that we can write when it comes to legalism in churches. Like,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, like, don't celebrate holidays. If you don't tithe, you're robbing God, you're going to hell, and similar stuff that I've
Right.
been hearing for years. And I just roll my
Yeah.
eyes. I can't believe how
I
people, yeah.
and I mean, okay, so I'm part of the vineyard, but I say it this way. My friend would say the same thing, and if he watches this, he'll giggle when I say it. He knows what I'm about to say as well. We are my my friend and his wife, and myself and my wife, and our people in our church are part of the vineyard, but we're not of it. Paul just giggled in the background because he knows me well enough. It is true though. And so what I've said within the vineyard to many ministers that I've had the opportunity to talk to is one of the things in the North America vineyard um, that we have got to this was back in the 90s. I said this to countless vineyard ministers, not just traveling, but that would come to the airport and I would just happen to be there. We were co-pastoring elsewhere, but I was helping out. And and I would say, the vineyard has become religious about being not religious. So don't ever think as an individual that you've beat this whole religious thing, right? It started back in the 60s and 70s with a very evangelistic move. That really was the Jesus movement. That was a really evangelistic, I'll say, movement more than anything else. And it actually burst out of that was birthed the vineyard, among other things. But man, we just decided that everything that was religious was just not us. And that was the late 60s into the 70s, and by the 90s we'd become religious about not being religious. And if you think you're an individual that cannot or is not affected by religiosity, then I'm sorry to tell you that means you're affected by religiosity. And so if somebody asks you within a group of people, you're in a group of people, and somebody from the platform asks a group that you're sitting within, or starts to talk about those people that are religious and what a religious person sounds like and acts like, and all the way through that explanation, you're thinking to yourself, boy, am I glad that's not me. Sorry, that actually is one of those indicators that he's talking to you. Another one
like in the parables, God, I'm so glad I'm not like one.
I'm not like them. Yeah,
yeah,
that's exactly right. So we always need to be on the lookout for it. One of the things that characterizes a person with a target on them for this religiosity is complacency and or arrogance. And here's how it plays out. The complacency is, well, God's got this under control. He's already won the fight. I'm good. And I've got my fire insurance ticket, and so I'm good. And so it's all good. And I don't have to worry. So I can just go, blissfully along my life and never have to worry about squat. And I can just, leave me alone. I'm good. I'm good. I don't challenge me. I don't need to be challenged. I've got it, right? It's all under control. Or that's the complacent guy, or the arrogance that says, ain't no flies on me. I'm a child of the king. Well, who are you talking to? Like, who do you think I am? Who do you think you're talking to here? That kind of stuff, right? In those attitudes, you just put targets on yourself. And then you wonder why things happen, and really weird things happen. Sometimes we bring this on ourselves, and we don't need the enemy's kingdom within miles of us. I used to joke. With a church that got to know my wife and I quite well. We were there a lot, and one day I said, "You have to understand something about Satan. He was created. A created individual takes up an allotted amount of space, and that's it. What that means is that if Satan is in Chicago, I said Chicago. If Satan is in Chicago, then I'm good.
I mean, it is here, so you don't have to hide.
The crazy thing here is we were in Indiana, and I actually told this church that if Satan is in Chicago, that he's not here.
That's why we're starting this podcast, to fight it back, to drive Satan to Indiana. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, we'll drive him to Indiana. So now it is also true. He has a kingdom, and he has guys that he can send elsewhere, and so we get infected and affected by them. If you believe that you are such that Satan himself is after you, you probably have a very inflated view of who you actually are. Unless Father's actually told you. Now, understand, this isn't you looking in the mirror telling you. I'm talking about Father telling you who you are in the kingdom. And if he tells you who you actually are in the kingdom, again, you're not special, because that's available to everybody, being told who you are in the kingdom. However, if who he tells you you are is such that you need to be worried about Satan, and now I'm serious. What it means is you need a group of people around you, intercessors with the call of intercessors, and you need a group of prophetic intercessors who have a heart for you, and if you have a spouse and a family, so that they will war over you. And that has to happen. If you have been told by Father, then that has to be in place yesterday. There are things you need to be doing and have in place if that's who you are in the kingdom. If not, chances are good you're your own worst enemy.
I don't even know how we came to this topic, from
I don't know
talking
either, but
about
I had to say it.
regional
I'm sorry.
principalities of legalism to this. But can you please, parallel this story, what happened to you in Pennsylvania, to what happened in Atlanta?
Sure. So we were driving we were driving into Atlanta. I had been there in the business world before, but never for ministry, right? So Sigrid and I did what we always did, like I described earlier. Father, what are you up to? This was actually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the trip that Sigrid actually said to me on the outskirts of Atlanta. This time, we're going to ask what Father's up to. Let's not worry about what enemy's up to. And then if he cares to tell us, great, but let's find out what Father's up to. So we're going along. And I recall we went under this underpass of a street and got out the other side and into an argument with each other. Like, I'm telling you, that fast, out of nowhere. I don't even know what the argument was about. We went a couple of miles and several underpasses, and then we got to this underpass and we went under it. Argument ended, and we looked at each other and went, what was that? And so I smelled something foul afoot, so to speak, and I started thinking out loud with Sigrid. That has the aroma of all of the earmarks of a principality. And we need to take note of what that first street was, and then what the last street was. And we'll ask the pastor of the church we're about to go to. And let's just investigate. So we put it in our back pocket because that was enemy's turf. We wanted what Father was doing. And so we got that. Get to the church. We're there for a week. But halfway through the week, it's just the pastor. I think his wife was elsewhere. It was just him and Sigrid and I. And so it was safe to talk about this. And we told him what happened. And he said, do you mind if I ask, what was the street, the first one you went under? We told him. And he giggled. And, okay. And I'm thinking, what? And then he says, what was the street where it all stopped? And I told him. He goes, that is fabulous. What you got. He said, I've never, that actually explains so much, but he said, I can't tell you how often that happens. Because there is a principality. Now, this is the reversal, right? He's telling me, right, the local guy who should know. And my voice all the way through traveling was, you guys you're the boots on the ground. This is the stuff you guys are supposed to know. My job isn't supposed to be to tell you as a prophetic voice. It shouldn't be up to me to tell you what's happening in your area. It should be up to me to confirm what's happening in your area as an outside voice, seeing what I see and hearing what I hear. Same with my wife. And what we say to you shouldn't be news. It should just be confirmation. Anything else, someone's dropped the ball. And it's the same way for couples and individuals. And even nations. The nation should be self-aware as much as an individual should be self-aware, as much as a church should be self-aware, and not to mention the pastor of it. So I mentioned all of that, and I said, so you can't possibly know how happy I am to hear what you just said. And I said, so fill me in, like give me the complete download here, right? So he did. And the beauty of this was this gentleman had a ministry outside of Georgia, not only outside of his church, but outside of Georgia, and had done and was about to, as it turned out, more traveling. And so our kind of connection in all of this was for a reason. God got our attention at the airport, and quite demonstrably, this gentleman, the pastor, was picked out of the crowd by a visiting ministry on the airport platform and brought up to the platform, got ministry. Now he's walking back to his seat. Now his seat was behind me, and I'm in the front row off to one side and right at an aisle. I'll never forget, he got halfway between the platform and me. Now, that meant he was about 25 feet away from me. Okay. A lot of space between the front row and the platform. And this is one of the reasons why. He gets halfway, about 25 feet from me. And it was as though a grenade went off at his feet. He shot up into the air. His back was to the platform. They didn't say anything. They were just saying things. It wasn't even like the old days, more Lord. It was more like, Lord, be with this gentleman. He really needs your presence. Just do what you got to do. All that kind of stuff, right? Real general. Bang at his feet. Literally left the ground and was kind of propelled forward. He rolled, and now his head is looking up at me from my feet. So I bent over, asked him if he was physically okay. Where are you hurt? Are you fine? And he just kind of mumbled, "I'm fine. He was completely gone, out of it, right? So I started praying for him. And what I was praying over him was prophetic. And I didn't know if he would ever recognize that or not. I didn't even know if he'd ever recognize me. Turns out that was the pastor of that church in Atlanta. And I was invited with his permission, but invited by the associate pastor. And that was another story that happened at the airport and his leadership team behind the stage. And so on the strength of that, he went to this gentleman and said, can we get this guy down, and his wife? So I'm walking in now. My wife and I are walking into the church for the first time. All of that's taken place. And we're not putting two together at all, because I didn't know I only knew that the associate was from this church. I didn't know this other guy. So I'm setting up to do worship, and then I'm going to speak that night. So my wife and I are doing what we do, and we're getting, ready to practice with the worship team and blah, 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 blah. The pastor walks in, and across the room, oh my goodness, that's all I hear. So I turn around, and he goes, "It's you." And I looked at him and I said, "Oh, you're right. This is me. But who are you?" And he goes, "Well, I'm the pastor of the church." And I said, "Okay, but that's not ringing any. You obviously know me from somewhere." He said, "Yeah, the airport church. You don't remember?" And all of a sudden, Father said, gave me the flashback, right? Out of all of the other experiences, gives me the flashback to this guy that was at my feet. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to check this out. So you won't pick this up on the camera, I doubt. But I went like this, because because he was upside down to me, right? So I put my face over and I go, "Oh my God." While I'm down like that, I went, "Oh my goodness, I do recognize you," right? It was the most hilarious thing. He knit us together in a moment based on historical stuff, but the purposes that God had, we were coming in his church in a very strategic moment, and we needed the information that we got downloaded from Father for not only the church but for him, and the leadership team. So it was really cool. Principality information. When you find out what Father is doing, you will be able to translate sometimes he'll tell you what the actual his angels are doing in the town. Other times he'll just tell you the generality of what he's up to in with that church or with that couple or with that geography. And he can do the same thing with the nation. uh, uh, that's the information that's exciting, when he tells you what the angels are up to. Now I'm going to connect the last podcast with this one. When he shows you the angels, or allows you to have a stronger sense of their presence around you, in my case, being visually able to see them and audibly able to speak with them, at times, you walk into a church. We had not been. I'll give you this. We had not, as an example, we had not been at the airport church in probably, I'll say, about 5 or 6 years at this one point. And something was going on, and we got there early, because of who we wanted to reconnect with, that was part of the conference that was speaking. We got there really early. Nobody else was coming in yet. It was all staff and worship team and all that kind of stuff. I'm sitting there way in the back, and and I'm literally looking at the spot where I saw that cherubim, that what I'll call a cherub, because it was huge with the belt at the roof line. I was looking in that general area, and what I was allowed to see was the angels that were with Sigrid and I were hugging, high-fiving, and it's like an old boys network with the house angels at the airport. I was crying like a baby when I saw that. And I think I just want to say there's experiences in God's kingdom, that we miss out on when we settle. And by that I mean, my friend and I described 3 types of individual in the body. and they're available, and none of them are wrong. None of them are bad. They all have their role. But there are people who are more comfortable and have the call of a settler. There are those that are comfortable, more so, being a pioneer. And there are those that are more comfortable and predominantly only comfortably at peace, who are explorers. You need all three. You don't know where to go unless you've got an explorer in your midst to suss out what's there. The world didn't know that there was a new world until three groups figured it out, right? The Vikings, or Norse, came over here, and possibly even with the Vikings, the Knights Templar came over here. There's archaeological evidence for all of this. And Columbus. Now, all three, the two groups and Columbus, were explorers. Once those explorers explored what they explored and discovered what they discovered, new explorers explored the rest of the continent, of the states that you're in, from east to west, of the country I'm in Canada, from east to west, and so forth, all the way through the whole of the New World. Explorers were necessary to find out what was there, as well as what was available, as well as what were the pitfalls. Then the pioneers followed, the ones that weren't comfortable where they were on the eastern seaboard. There's more. You're telling me there's more? Well, I got to find it. Well, now I can't stay here because I know we have to get out there. That's a pioneer. So the pioneers went out and cleared the land and took the soil and got the rocks away and cleared it so that the settlers could come, build the buildings, build the campfires, and farm the land and till the land, and as well bring the livestock. You need all three, but all three need to be acceptable. The problem currently in multiple denominations is that many don't know those three even exist, and the ones that have an idea seem to only have an idea about the first two, the settlers and the pioneers, but not the concept of the explorer. And that's just an observation, not an indictment. It's just an observation. But the more that we can discover, you want to know who you are in the kingdom, there's a good start. Figure out whether you're a settler, a pioneer, or an explorer. Ask Father, he'll show you.
Ron, before we go to the next story, can we just conclude that in both of these testimonies, in Pennsylvania and in Atlanta, when you and your spouse encountered these local principalities or regional principalities, in the first case, it was the spirit of legalism, and the second one was spirit of argument or division. In both cases, once what you went through with your spouse, and then when you shared with local pastors of both of these states, they were both acknowledging that they knew about these issues and they knew about these local principalities. Is this correct?
Yes.
Okay.
However, outside in as far as Pennsylvania is concerned, we've talked to. I gave you the example of a couple of ministries that did know something about what was going on in the state, but I've talked with others since who had ministered in the state from traveling, or others who pastored in the state, and they were completely unaware. It wasn't that didn't believe what I was saying to them. It made sense once it was fully articulated. But in the moment when they were ministering, it wasn't something that they were even aware of. So again, you minister blind. If you're successful in spite of yourself. In that case, is the way I would put it. And I know how that sounds. I know exactly how that sounds. But having been blind at some point and then having some sight at another point, I know the difference. Right? For me, I've lived the difference, and I can tell you the difference is that phrase really encapsulates it. If you're successful in spite of yourself, and it's because Father designed it and it was going to have it in spite of who you are and what you don't know. Now, I can't leave this without this. If that's the case, and somebody has a successful ministry, the question becomes: does that mean that they're doing everything right, or does it really more about Father's will? And I'll answer that by bringing you to the Great Awakening, the Welsh Revival. Sorry, the Welsh Revival. That revival was an incredible revival. It's one of the, if there's a favorite, that's the one, that's my go-to. Um, Evans himself was the one who was tagged with this revival. It was in spite of him. If somebody is listening to this and has this gentleman as a hero, I'm really sorry to say, Evans was a control freak by all those, by the accounts of all those who were with him. And so the Welsh Revival, the fact that we know about it is in spite of Evans, not because of Evans. He was he was the donkey God was pleased to use. Okay, I'll put it in a better language. He was the vessel that God was pleased to use, but he was not the one that was meant to take any credit, because ultimately the Welsh Revival could have lasted, in my opinion, could have lasted longer, um, if he had not done things that he did. Having said that, you could probably say that about the Toronto Blessing, the Welsh Revival, the Great Awakening, and almost any other movement that's happened down through history. It actually would have been better and different and more extensive, but also would have progressed into something different than it started out as, even if the hands of various ministers had not got in the way. So uh, so just because somebody is ministering blind, yeah, it can be successful, but don't be too quick to give the positive blame to the person. It really wasn't them to begin with. They were just the vessel being used, and their
Okay.
success, right? The success of that church, the largeness of that church, isn't because they're doing everything right
Okay, so
necessarily.
basically, to conclude with this mini topic, with these two experiences, that if there is a regional principality, and there is in
Hmm.
majority of states, countries, cities,
Hmm.
it doesn't always have to be something so obvious, like, oh, it's the occult,
Right.
or it's witchcraft, or it's like
Right.
children are missing and being like, something's horrible is being happening to them. It could be something as simple as everyday, like gossiping, or division, or like you said, legalism. It can be something so common to us that we are so used to it, so we don't recognize it. It doesn't always have to be extremely oppressing and extremely dark. So this
Right.
brings new revelation, especially uh you know in my discernment, because some stuff we're so used to it, we can see them as normal, as natural, as like it's so common, like I'm
That's right.
drinking this water, it's so common to me. So
That's right.
this helps us to understand that uh, there could be principalities over certain things, that maybe like, oh, I feel gloomy today. In 3 days, oh, I feel gloomy again, and in 10 days, I feel gloomy again. It could be like we are trying to find different reasons. Well, it's cloudy. Well, no one called me maybe today. It could be, and to the certain degree, most of these reasons are legit, like psychological, emotional and stuff like
Hmm.
that. But it could be a bigger issue, like you're under maybe this dominion that maybe enjoys in a way, in a wicked way, to oppress people by putting depressing thoughts that they're not worthy of God's love, or maybe they don't have friends, or maybe they don't have meaning and purpose in this life. With all these kinds of thoughts, they keep bombarding them, and they may think, oh, just a depression, I just need a pill, or maybe I just need to go out and enjoy sunlight. And while all these cures and medicine and reasons to go and help yourself are legit, um, it could be a principality. But unfortunately, if we are not used to it, and if there is no revelation, like you said, from the Father to explain to us, no, it's deeper than that, it's heavier than that, it's bigger than that. There's a local principality over your city or your country, and you have to pray against it. So that helps
That's
us
right.
bring revelation. Thank you for that. Can we now please skip to the subtopic when your wife had experiences with God would put, as I like to name it, cloak of invisibility? Because you gave one example in the last a month ago in the
Right.
previous episode when God was protecting you and your spouse on a highway in a car when you know the enemy, the opposition couldn't even see you. You were literally protected, made invisible. Can you give us more examples of
Right.
God doing the same thing to you, or including you and your spouse together?
The first one I'm going to relate happened to me. Um, I I had come over the years since the 80s to recognize my wife and I met in 82, married in 83. Prior to that, I had already come to recognize that I had something of a stealth. Um, I was very aware of stealth in the natural, oddly enough, very drawn to stealth technology, airplanes and ships and anything else. Really fascinated by it, drawn to it, felt compelled to learn about it. Then it turned to um, saying and nudging me with the concept that there's that first which is natural, then that which is spiritual. You've heard me say that over and over again in the last podcast, and I've already said it a couple times now today. So uh, and so what he told me then was, and in the spirit, you and the person I'm going to lead you to are going to have a ministry. Some part of your ministry is going to be this with a stealth cloak, so that I can get you places that you wouldn't get otherwise. Now, while that was kind of in the background and from time to time happening, this this minister by the name of Brother Lawrence came along and had his own experiences of being invisible at the Russian border or the Iron Curtain countries that they were called in those days, going into communist countries with Bibles. And he would have his trunk absolutely filled, and he would have the back seat of his car completely loaded, and under blankets were all these Bibles. And he would come, excuse me, and he'd come to the border and just pray, Father, blind the eyes of the border guards. And the countless uh, experiences that he had. Well, I had the privilege of hearing him live a couple of times, as well as reading the book. And every
And
time
his book
I'm
is called God's Smuggler, correct?
correct,
So
correct.
I think I read a book. It could be that one, or it could be a very similar one when an author mentions that he went not just the Soviet Union, but Czechoslovakia, Poland, former
That's right.
Yugoslavia, the country I'm
The,
coming from.
the
So
Warsaw Pact countries, yeah.
yes, so I think I read that book for a class while I was back at Moody. I
Mm,
forgot the name, but it sounds very interesting because the whole book was like real lifetime experiences with God
Yes.
doing insane things. And when I say insane, I
Yes.
mean in a good way. How God
Really
will
insane. Yeah.
use this guy or different people to smuggle Bibles. And I know that sounds so bad, like, because usually when you use the word smuggling, it means like you're doing criminal things. If you're smuggling Bibles, and God did supernatural stuff in so many countries. People would get Bibles in their own language. So I just
Yep.
want to give that as the context. How
Thank
it's
you.
interesting that I read that book years ago, and now you're talking about it. So you actually
That's
met the author in person.
Yes, and it was
Wow.
an absolute treat. Um, a couple that was again that was before my wife and I met. But the gentleman that I was working with at the time, he and I got in ourselves into places that we had no business being in, but it was all really wild adventures in the kingdom for us, and it was I cherish those days. But that was one of the events he took us through. We actually had some materials that we were distributing and selling at a booth. And so it got us into conferences and meeting speakers that we wouldn't otherwise have met or listened to. And that was one of the ones that happened. Also, Corey Ten Boom is another name from China who had some really amazing experiences. And we were lucky enough, fortunate enough, and blessed enough to meet her right hand woman who visited Toronto, and the pastor that we had at the time um, knew her, and she visited the church. And uh, behind the scenes, he orchestrated us being invited with her and another couple to a lunch, and we ended up in Chinatown, downtown Toronto, having dim sum with the right hand woman of Corey Ten Boom. Now Corey has a story that is uh, like none other, and this woman has a story like none other, and nobody knows her story because everybody listens to Corey Ten Boom's story and the movies that have been made about her and the books that have been written. But this woman, it was again another amazing woman to sit down and just ask questions about in terms of what she experienced. And the story she related about Corey was, I believe it was. I don't think it was her. I think it was Corey standing in front of a firing squad, pregnant in front of a firing squad, and the order was given to shoot, and all the bullets hit the wall behind her. Not one hit her. They pulled the bullets. They pulled the shells. They counted how many shells had been fired at her, not just the line of people. But one of the things we don't realize is that in a firing squad, there's a professionalism that happens. It's not just willy nilly, and so they could literally figure out, uh, yeah. So the bullets literally, the trajectory had to have gone around her. They didn't
Have
go through.
you? I'm sorry, I just have a question. Have you ever watched the movie Matrix?
Oh yeah, one of my favorites.
Oh, it's not the same, but like that ability of God stopping the bullets or rerouting them. So God
Exactly.
was doing that before Matrix. It's so cool. I'm sorry.
So
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because we're talking about the one who created everything. So you're telling me, not you, but if somebody has a problem with this, are you actually trying to say, without saying it, that the one who created the universe couldn't bend a bullet? So your response would most likely be, well, that goes against the laws of physics. Okay, but the one who created those laws is the one who also gets to alter them at his own will. And we just need to be okay with that. And so he created you and I as physical beings. But let's just go forward here. So we're in downtown Toronto at a meeting of the local general Toronto area pastors, um, and we're wanting as a group. There was about 50 of us. Excuse me. We wanted to discuss some things openly among each other, and see if we couldn't come to a consensus. This was during '94, and so the concern really was about. It's great for the rest of the world, and they're showing up and taking it elsewhere. That's fabulous. But what about the local Toronto pastors? Right? What about them? What can we do about the local Toronto pastors? Well, I was one, and everybody there was one. So we wanted to find out what we could do about ourselves, and what might come out of that. We break for lunch across the street. I never forget this till the day I die. Across the street is a deli. 20 or so of us go to this deli. No, wasn't that much. Maybe a dozen. Maybe a dozen. We go to this deli, and I'm first in line. And so I give my sandwich order to the woman behind the counter. She says, "Okay, thank you, sir. Not a problem." And she shuffles a few things. Now, a person who's got 10 or 12 people in a line shuffles nothing, right? This is lunchtime in a deli. It's called mise en place. Everything is in its place and ready. You don't just go, that's what this woman did in front of me. And I'm thinking wow, is this ever weird? Did she even hear what I said? And she finishes just kind of shuffling around, looks at the guy that I was co-pastoring with, and said, "Yes, sir, can I take your order?" Hasn't done my sandwich, nothing. So his name was Bob. Bob says, "Sure, you can take my order, but ma'am, this gentleman is in front of me, and he gave you an order. I think you need to do his sandwich first." And she looks not at me, looks at Bob and says, "Oh, I'm sorry." Why is she sorry to Bob? "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sure." Now she looks at me and says, "Oh, how can I help you?" Like I haven't ordered. So I gave her my order again. She looks at me, looks down at the cutting board, and then looks over at Bob. "Yes, sir. Can I have your order?" And so twice. So Bob says, "He's still standing here." But sure, okay. And he gives her my order. Now, by this point, everybody in the line has now heard this interaction, right? Person number 3 comes up. "Yes, sir. Can I, or ma'am, or whoever it was, can I have your order?" Well, this guy's still standing here. Can you please take his order? Because I feel really bad. Oh, sure. Once again, to that person, "I'm so sorry." And then looks at me and says nothing. Looks at me like she's looking through me, and then looks back at the third person and says, "Can I take your order?" They get their order. Fourth person, fifth person, sixth person. By this time, Bob is sitting at a table right behind me. And he's beside himself. Everybody in the line is giggling. And Bob says, "Hey, Ron, you're still standing there? You haven't been served yet?" Big volume, so she'd hear it, right? I said, "That's right. Been here all along." She turns, she's looking at the direction of my voice, but that's it. And then asks the next person in line for their order. And so when she does that, and she's making now that person's sandwich, this is like person 5 or 6. Bob says, "So what are you thinking about what do you think? Is God up to something?" Again, same volume, right? "Is God up to something?" I said, "Bob, I think I'm on a forced fast." And all the while I'm saying that, I'm thinking, this surely this woman can hear all this and see me, but apparently not. The whole line gets served, and I'm still standing there, dumbfounded. And and I stood there. I don't know how long I stood there. I honestly can't put a time on it because I don't know. I stood there. I was in shock. I was in absolute amazement that I was able to stand there this whole time. And so that I turned around and sat down with Bob. And we're just howling with laughing. And now we're walking across the street back into the church. And Bob said, "Seriously, Ron, what just happened?" And I said, "Bob, this would have been 92, 95. This would have been about 95. Oh no, sorry, I'm sorry. It was in 94. 94 at the airport started in January, the end of January. This would have been in the summer. Okay, so it was still early days. And I said, so Bob, from the early 80s, this thing about stealth, Father's been talking to me about it pretty consistently, and the whole time, when Brother Lawrence came up, what I felt go off in my spirit. Not only was I excited about his exploits, to use a word from Daniel. um, not only was I excited at those exploits, it went off in me like an atom bomb. I'm going to make you invisible. And so every time that went off in me, I would always question back, how do you make somebody invisible? Like, how does, and so I said, Bob, he just answered me. So I don't know what's about to take place. I know that Sigurd and I have a call to the body, and we're going to be traveling. And you know that. You know I've talked about that a lot. And so I don't know how imminent that is, but boy, it's close. And this tells me that I now know how to be made invisible. I've experienced it. I can't say he can't do it. I don't know what that is going to be like, but that's where it starts. And as it turns out, I was right. Which
You
we'll
know
get
that
into.
that story reminds me a bit to what was happening in Acts chapter 8 when the spirit took Philip away and he was no more. He
Right.
wasn't dead, he was just transported, moved, taken to another location. So that didn't happen literally to you, but in the same fashion, going from one example of the stealth to another
Right.
example, it seems like the spirit was doing something that we can only see in sci-fi movies or hear in some horror stories. Like, is this even impossible? And sometimes, attributes and abilities like these are usually given like to the enemy, like we see for example in the movies like with Predator,
Right.
fighting people
Right.
or alien. Like Predator has this stealth alien technology that can do this to
Right.
himself. Or like sometimes, people who both Christians and non-Christians, when they share their paranormal experiences in the woods, they would go and they would like sense this evil, but they cannot see it, and then it would suddenly the entity would choose to reappear and materialize. So we usually hear about this ability. I won't say necessary technology, ability, technology, skill, whatever, but being
Right.
used by the enemy. But it can show from your example that it's not bad or evil in itself. It can be used for different purposes, but even God through his spirit can camouflage people like you, his servants, for certain purpose, right?
Yes.
For greater good. So in this case it was so that you would go certain places, do certain things, God through you, or in the example of Brother Lawrence, so that he would pray and Bibles would be hidden in his car, even though if you would just open the box, you would see the Bibles, they even disappear, right? But
Yeah.
somehow it will be as if they disappeared, and all those communist guards, they'll be like, oh yeah, you can go through, and then he would bring the Bibles and they'll be camouflaged, they'll be smuggled, and like
Exactly.
all these amazing things. I'm just saying how, it's very cool to hear about the same things we hear in movies or horror stories that the enemy is using. Now we can hear how God can use similar thing but for greater good, and that makes me happy.
Yeah, and all the while keeping in mind that what God does is the original, and what the enemy uses is the copy, right? The reasonable facsimile. um,
I have a question. Do you have more stories of stealth, or that was the last one?
yeah. Oh no. There's. It got frustrating. Very frustrating until the Lord really got a hold of my heart and my attitude. So we had we were in Atlanta, as a matter of fact. So this is kind of the rest of the story, as the gentleman on the radio was so kind to coin the phrase. Uh, so we're in a hotel, and Hurricane Opal came through, made landfall at Destin, Florida. Remember that because it's significant. It made landfall at Destin, Florida, about 40 miles west of Pensacola, on the top of the Panhandle, and we're in Atlanta. Hurricanes don't normally, with force, make it that far inland. Opal did. So we have about at this moment that I'm going to jump into, we had about maybe an hour and a half before Opal was due, or the effects of it were due to hit the city. So the situation we were in was the hotel was two buildings separated by a culvert. Okay, wasn't deep, and I knew this was a hurricane and was going to drop water. And this is Atlanta, and there's not a lot of depth to the dirt, even around Atlanta. And with palm trees, you're usually relatively safe with palms because they'll bend rather than uproot normally. But I was convinced it wasn't necessarily going to be normal, right? Opal. And so I leave Sigurd in the room. I will be back. I need to find a parking space that is not by a tree. This was my parameter. Father, help me find a parking spot that's not by a tree. There wasn't one. I'm going around and around. I felt like I was driving around Jericho, and then around and around and around. And I can't find one. There's one spot. And that spot was at a spot where one of the larger palm trees was 4 feet from my bumper. And I passed it and passed it and passed it. I wasn't gonna. That's the very spot. And then it finally hit me. You know what? We've got big angels. I've talked to them. I've seen them. They're huge. If they can't protect me from a silly little palm tree, well, it wasn't little, but a little palm tree based on the comparative nature to who they are, then something's really wrong here. So I park. Now I'm obstinate. I'm a little well, there's words for it, but I'm challenging the Lord. All right, okay, you're not going to give me anywhere else to go. I'm going right here. See that tree? I'm going to go right here. Let's see what we can come up with in okay, so I'm saying what I'm saying right now to get you to understand I'm not special. I'm normal. And yeah, in hindsight, it wasn't the best conversation to have with the Lord. But nonetheless, he is who he is, and he's gracious. And he lived through David yelling at him. So there's nothing we're going to say to him that's new. So I park. I get out, and I ask the Lord, first of all, forgive me for what I just barked out at you, but honestly, could you just do something about this tree, because we can't afford to not have this vehicle because of where we're about to go. Like I was informing him of something he didn't already, right? But anyways, so I get in the room. Now, more context. This just so happens to be the night, and it's the reason why my wife will never forget it. This is the night before the morning that the verdict for O.J. Simpson was delivered. So here we go. It's 11 o'clock, and it's windy, and it's 12 o'clock, and boy, is it ever windy. And now the rain is absolutely horizontal. I get out I look out the window as far as I can see. We're right at the culvert, okay, our door. And I'm looking out the window. I'm not opening anything up, but I can see palms, and they're horizontal. They're like about 4, 5, 6 feet off the ground and then horizontal. I've never seen palms that. I've seen palms like on angles, but that was ridiculous. And I'm thinking, oh Lord, that palm, please protect us from that palm tree. Then I'm looking in the culvert, and I'm seeing the water come up and up and up and up. And I said, honey, go to bed. All my gear, apart from just our suitcases, all my gear, guitar, all the rack, all the electronics are in the room. They're not in the car. So they're safe from that perspective, but they're now all up on chairs. Everything's off the floor based on what I'm seeing the water level do. And I said, look, you need to get some sleep. I'm staying up tonight because I'm taking care of the stuff. If and you, because if this water gets too much higher, we're going to have to move, and it won't be nice because that wind is just absolutely howling. But we're going to have to move if the water level gets any higher. And so I stayed up all night long, and everything was fine. Didn't come in the doorway. We were okay. Everything was cool. Get in the car the next day, and we're on our way to guess where? Destin, Florida. That was where we were about to go to a conference for Christian International. Has a headquarters. Their headquarters are in Destin, Florida. And there was a national conference that they were holding, and we wanted to just attend. And we got the news that a phone call the next day. Opal has decided that there's not going to be a conference because there's roof damage and different other things to the grounds. So we're gonna reschedule for next month. So Sigrid and I are in the car. We have a quick breakfast, and now what the plan was go down to Destin for a week for that conference, a couple of days on either side of it, because that was also the area. Remember, I said 40 miles away or so from Pensacola. At the time, the church, the Assemblies of God Church in Pensacola, was going through an absolute all-out revival. From Father's Day that year, and this was now in September, they were going every night, and it was a traveling evangelist that was speaking, Steve Hill, and all kinds of really cool stuff. And they'd had from Father's Day until September, they'd had 12,000 decisions for Christ. Right? And so we wanted to check that out. Remember I talked about explorers? So in that week, that's what we had planned. And then the week after, we were going to take a vacation down in Florida just to get a break and a breather before we were back on the road. So that week is blown away. And so Sigrid says, so what do you want to do? Like, what do we do? Do you want to just drive to Florida and stick our noses in the wall? Get ourselves into trouble there. And I said, no, I want to go to Destin. And she said, okay, but you just heard the newscast, and the news is saying this. If you have plans to come to Destin, don't. Not only because of the destruction on the ground that has to be cleaned up, but you're going to need a place to stay. And the hotels are all closed for 3 reasons. They've either been condemned, and so they're completely closed, or they're filled with FEMA workers already, or will be. So they're not going to give you a room if FEMA's not already there. And the third is because some of those hotels don't exist anymore. Forget that they've been closed because they've been deemed unsafe. There's some that don't even exist anymore. So you're just not going to get a room. We went anyway. Long story made longer. We got there, and the damage on the way down was something to behold. But the damage at Destin was otherworldly. I've seen hurricane damage before. This was on another scale. And the first thing we did was try and find a hotel. We found a hotel, go in, first one. We walk in, and I say, look, really stupid question, right? Given what just happened yesterday, but we really need a room. And even if it's only for a night, it would be really cool. We're from Canada. We've been driving since Toronto. I didn't tell them we were in Atlanta, but nonetheless, we've been making our way down here, and it'd be really helpful. He said, you know what? I can give you 2 nights, yeah, if you want them. If you're going to stay in this hotel, it's at your own risk. But yeah, I got 2 rooms for you. So we did. Okay, so we've got a room and our stuff's in the room. What do we do now? I said, well, we're here and there's nothing else to do. Let's go to Pensacola tonight, see if we can catch a meeting. So we do. All kinds of stuff happen when we're getting Pensacola. Really, really cool stuff. We get our seats. And again, we're talking about invisible. And both these locations play into this invisibility. So we get there, we seat ourselves. They give you a little thing, and they found out we were ministers, so so it was Reverend, Taylor and Reverend Mrs. Taylor, that kind of thing, right? And so we were in our seats for about maybe 10 minutes, and an usher comes up to us. Excuse me, folks. Are you guys ministers? I know I can see your tags, but I just need to ask. And I said, yes, we are. Well, you're sitting in the wrong seats. Okay, well, where are we supposed to be sitting? Is there a section? No. You're supposed to be on the platform. Pastor wants all the ministers that visit on the platform. Are you serious? They don't know us from it. Doesn't matter, sir. We just want you on the platform. Okay, so here we are. Now we're on the platform. Ah, boy. And so we're not. What's going to happen next? And so, Lyndall Cooley starts doing worship, and like Assemblies of God churches and Pentecostal churches up here are like to do, they stop worship and then they have a meet and greet. I'll turn around and say hi to your neighbor and blah 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 blah, and then worship starts back up. Well, in that little section of time, when they stopped that and everybody had met everybody, Pastor Kilpatrick, before he gave it back to Lyndall to start worship again, said, I want to know where everybody is from tonight in this building, because it was an overflow building as well. But in the main building, I just want to know who's from outside of the States. Let's do that. So Sigurd and I put our hands up, and a bunch of hands, around the building, and he's got his back to us. So he's finding out in the congregation who's from where. And then Lyndall yells across the platform, Pastor, there's a couple behind you. Oh, look at you two. Where are you guys from? So I yell out, Toronto. You could have heard a pin drop in this place. And I'm thinking, what did I just say? Was it something I said? And he said, okay, you're from Toronto. Yes, sir. Well, have you ever been to the airport church or had anything to do with it? Well, as a matter of fact, it's not our church. We are from a downtown Toronto church, pastoring there. But it also just so happens that I lead worship on the Wednesday mornings, and I'm on the worship team at night and the prophetic team, and so yeah, we help out. And he said, "Good enough. If you guys are willing, need to speak to you two after the service in my office. Can that happen?" And sure, of course. So we met. Now, in this meet and greet time that I just mentioned, here comes this pastor across the platform and introduces himself as a CI pastor. So we would have been at the conference with him. But this guy's a local Christian International pastor as well. And so, anyways, we get talking. And he finds out we've got a couple of nights, and he said, "That's fabulous, but you've got a spot in our house for the rest of the week. Just saying." I'll call my wife and make sure we're good with it, but I'll let you know by the end of the night, confirm it. But that's where you're staying. You're staying with us for the rest of the week after that hotel stay. And I want to introduce you to Bill Hammond, he's only the founder of Christian International. I want to introduce you two of you because I'm going to talk to him about having the two of you speak, or at least looking at me, at least you. And I'll get back to you on that as well. And tonight I'll be your escort into Pastor Kilpatrick's office. He knows me. It'll be safe. It'll be cool. Just stay with me and you'll be fine. So off we go at the end of the service, and Pastor Kilpatrick and his wife come into the office. Lyndall Cooley is there, the worship leader, this gentleman from CI, and Sigurd and I. And Pastor Kilpatrick says, "I have some questions for you. My first question is, how do you do it?" And it was about the fact that they were going, at that point, 7 nights a week. And how do you guys do it at the airport? And I said, you know what? I think that might be the wrong question, with all due respect. I think that might be the wrong question because that's for them. What I just heard Father say to me, I'm just going to tell you, you do with it what you will. But what analogy he gave me was concentrate, as opposed powdered soap in concentrate, or anything in concentrate, is far more powerful than the other stuff. So as much as Holy Spirit is doing some fabulous stuff, right, 7 days a week, can you imagine what would happen if you were only going maybe 4 or 5 nights a week? What would happen? Because now you're shortening the time frame. Everybody's got a chance to get a breather and have a real life, get the laundry done and all that kind of stuff, and get some rest. But in those 4 or 5 days, what about an experiment to see whether or not the intensity level, if Holy Spirit raises up the intensity level and it even gets stronger? So we had those kinds of issues, practical kind of housekeeping conversations. And then he said, "Okay, that's fabulous. Great news. I love what you're saying. And we'll pray into that, and we'll see what happens with that. But I need you to pray for us. You guys might be the first, at least you're the first that I'm aware of from the vineyard in this church. And so I don't want you to go away without having you guys pray for us." So I said, "Okay, so my wife will pray for your wife and I'll pray for you." And so I put my hand, I'm just going to stand up for a second. I put my hand right there, right? And I was speaking some things over him prophetically, and uh, there was and Father was really, really, really impacting him, and Sigrid was saying stuff over his wife, and Holy Spirit was absolutely doing some really cool stuff with his wife. And I went to back up and take my hand away from Pastor Kilpatrick, and he grabbed my hand and put it and held it. And I said, okay, I've been told that from time to time when I pray for people, my hands get hot. Sometimes I can feel it, sometimes I can't. What's happening? I just want to know what's happening. Now, the pause button. That's a very vineyard thing. John Wimber was very big on the interview. You pray for somebody, and then you find out if God did anything. Why would you pray for somebody and then just walk away? Why not find out if God's done anything? And if he hasn't, does he tell you to keep praying or not? Or give you some more instruction? Or does he have you have somebody else pray? You just never know. But if you don't ask questions, you don't know. So I do it by reflex, and I don't consider it a vineyard thing, even though it that's kind of where I heard it. For me, I'm just curious. That's where it hits for me. I want to know. I want to know. I don't want to just sit here and watch what God does. I really want to know what he's doing when he's willing to tell me. And if he doesn't tell me, I want to hear it from the person. It's just inquisitive, right? Curiosity killed the cat. So I'm asking him, what's going on? Like, so what about the hand? He said, your hand is burning me. But I know it's supposed to be there. I'm not letting it go. And jokingly, I should mention, at the airport, we had what we called catchers, right? If we were going to pray, if anybody on the prayer team was going to pray for somebody, there was always it was a rule that we went by that if you were on the prayer team, you don't pray for anybody unless there's somebody behind them that can facilitate a catch, so that they don't just flop willy-nilly and potentially hurt themselves. And and so I said, well, okay. And they didn't have that at Pastor Kilpatrick's church. That Steve Hill just went along and would tap his hand on somebody's head or shoulder, and they would just like a bomb went off. And if you can imagine a mosh pit from the platform, out in front of the platform, it looked more like a mosh pit than it looked like anything else. People just literally just not just collapsing, but jumping, falling, as little spiritual grenades would go off. So anyways, I was joking with him, and I said, look, we don't have any catchers. I'm used to catchers. You guys don't have catchers, but I'm used to having a catcher. You have a love seat in the office. Why don't the two of you stand in front of the love seat, and we'll use that as the catcher? And so that was what was behind Pastor Kilpatrick when he was grabbing my hand. And in the meanwhile, that's going on, and his wife is being impacted. I look over at Lyndall Cooley, and this is about 10 minutes in, and he's crumpled. He was standing, if you can think of the corner of the room. He was standing in the corner, right, using the two walls to support himself as a just in case. and had not been impacted. He had multiple people praying for him, and it wasn't anything bad. It's just that he noticed the same thing that Jeremy Sinnott at the airport noticed. People from around the globe prayed for that man, and he was a tree, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. It doesn't mean that God did nothing. It just means he didn't fall, and that's really all it means. And that was what Lyndall Cooley's experience was. Here he is in the corner. I look over, clumped, like he fell straight down the wall. And he's looking over me, and he had this face on him like a little child, looking up at me going, without saying a word, the facial expression was, wow. but I don't know how to explain this. This doesn't happen. Was kind of the look on his face.
I have to admit that never happened to me either. When I see YouTube clips of those things, just being honest,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
always looked weird to me. Always as if some people are faking. Like I remember the old days of
Yes.
Benny Hinn, he would do like this or with his coat, and like 100 people would fall down. I'm like, this guy is a charlatan. So I'm not saying that God is not doing these things. I'm not saying that in some cases is not legit. The same thing with prophecies or word of knowledge or tongues, but there are churches and pastors who are abusing these things and making it
Yes.
a mockery. So I
Yes.
think even if God will want to do something with me, out of concern not to look ridiculous, I would not never want to fall down. I'm just being very honest,
I
because
hear you. Yep.
usually in cases like this, that I've been observing for years and for decades online, in most things that I see, they look very odd. Sometimes even people pushing people, the audience
Right.
physically to like, oh, it didn't work when I'm praying. Now I'm gonna push
I'm
you.
going to
It
push you.
almost
Yeah.
looks like a circus to me, and I'm like, I don't want
Any part of that.
non-Christians to see this and mock Christians who are serious about their faith. So again, I don't doubt that God can do whatever He wants to do, but I'm just saying, I don't know if I would want God to do this publicly. If you want
And
to do that in my own room with my, if I'm
that's
just
another
there,
thing
fine.
altogether. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. And it's legitimate. It just not your hasn't been your experience. And there's nothing illegitimate about that. It's perfectly legitimate. Um, what I will say is that what was happening, what God did in front of us was as much to catch my attention as it was to catch the individual's attention. That's how I. That's how kind of my takeaway was. Like this was uh, a moment by moment reinforcement to me. I can do this, and I can do this because I can do this, and I'm going to do this because I'm going to do this, and I'm doing this in spite of you, not because of you. And always remember that. That was what went off inside of me when I'm about to tell you when I'm telling you those things and some of the others at CI. It was just as much in my face as it was for the people experiencing what they experienced, and I always tried to make sure that I had no hand on them unless Father told me directly, "I want your hand here." I didn't, and that was on purpose because I wanted it to be. I wanted to have, as it were, nothing to do with anything that happened to them. I wanted to just speak what Father gave me to speak and have him do what he was pleased to do. Now, put the pause button down. We're back at the airport and we're praying for people from night to night. I would come across people who I might pray for 5, 10 minutes, and I knew God was doing something. I knew, but rock solid. This person was just in a stance that was really solid so that they weren't going to fall. But that was their protection, and that was their own. There was a childlikeness to a lot of it. That okay, if I'm falling, it's because I can't stand up, not because I'm going over. There was something in among pastors that should never have been a joke. But they used to talk about courtesy falls. And what you described in some cases was that it was a courtesy fall. And it might be a group doing a courtesy fall or a person doing a courtesy fall. Others will do that, and it kind of falls under that heading. But the reason why some people do it is because they don't want to be the one that resists and stands like an oak tree in front of Benny Hinn, and then has to go back to their church. Well, what happened to you? What was that all about? I'm just saying, there's some people that think that way, and so they would go down. Just so knowing all of that, I would see this person struggling. Some of them were crying And it wasn't because of what God was doing. It was because in their mind, it was what God wasn't doing while they were looking at everybody else. And so my heart broke when I saw that. So finally, Father gave me a solution one night. Watching this person just struggling and tears, and my heart's breaking for this guy. And so I stopped and I said, open your eyes for a second. Just open your eyes for a second and look at me. So he did. And I said, can I take the struggle away? He said, please. And I said, it seems to me that your struggle is between here. Oh, this is the floor. Is between here and here. And he laughed, just started laughing. And I said, can I help you take that struggle away? He said, how are you going to do that? And I said, lay down. Just lay down. Just lay down. And I'll pray for you laying down. And he looked at me, you can do that? And I said, nobody's ever said you can't. If the struggle is about from here to here, take it away. Lay down. Relax. I'll pray for you. And let's see what God does while you're laying down. It's not about that you have to be down on the floor to experience something, but you're having a problem standing. And I want to take that problem away from you. And what God did while he was laying on the floor was profound. So I don't know why I went there, but I just felt like somebody needed to hear that. So let's put the take the pause button back up. So we've got all this stuff happening in the office, and we're about to wrap up. And Pastor Kilpatrick says, "Are you guys going to be around tomorrow?" Yeah. Here in the service tomorrow? Yeah, we're hoping to. He said, would you be able to? I'm willing to. I can give you 15 minutes. Would you be willing to give us, my people, a synopsis of what's happening globally with this renewal? Because already since Father's Day, my sense, he said, is that the people of our church are getting nearsighted, thinking and seeing what God's doing here. But I think they're losing perspective on what God's doing globally. And I want to re-engage them with a global eye. Is that something you could do? Well, Sigrid and I, all the way through this, are giggling to ourselves because Sigrid had been spending the last 6 months prior to that collecting everything off of, in those days, it was bulletin board services and emails concerning that. So I had mounds of information. And I said, 15 minutes? I could probably do a couple of days. So I'll boil it down and we'll do 15. So we did. And it absolutely impacted the whole house. Very, very, very much of an impact. And then we're that next night, after that 15, after the service, this Christian International pastor had 2 guys that he did not tell us anything about. He said, I want you and your wife to pray for these 2 gentlemen. I'm not going to tell you anything about them. I want you to hear what you hear, see what you see, and deliver it. And let's see what God does. So here we go into the back room. Nobody else is around. Just the 2 guys, my wife and I, and this CI pastor. And we deliver what we get for the 2 guys. And it turned out that we were about this far from naming what it was that they were actually up to. We kind of danced all around both of them, right? And it impacted them. It got their attention to the point where they looked at each other after we finished and said, okay, based on what you guys were just given by Father, you need to know who we are. So the first one says, you know, in the temple, when they anointed all of in Solomon's temple, when he when he was dedicating the new temple, they anointed all of the furniture before it was set back up. Yeah. And he said, well, oh, and you know, that the Bible talks about Israel rebuilding the temple in the end times. Yeah. Okay, but okay, so I'm just going to tell you, Israel has contracted me to make the anointing oil as accurately as I can to the specifications in Scripture, to reproduce it on a level in a volume that they can use it in the temple to rededicate the articles of the temple after it's built. Whew, okay. And does that tell you how close you were in the things that you were speaking over us? It really does. The other guy said, well, he's doing the anointing oil. I've been contracted by Israel to breed a red heifer. Not a lot of people know it, but it was a red heifer that was necessary for the dedication of the temple. And a red heifer, they actually have the Israeli government, along with the Jewish high priest, they actually have a standard, a written standard that has to be met for an animal to be called a red heifer. And he said, so I've been contracted in the city that I and my farm is in. The Israeli government have a jet in the airport on the tarmac solely for the purpose of, if I can get a red heifer, it goes on the plane and immediately goes over to them and they inspect it. So these are the two guys that we met. So then we go over for the rest of the week. We're at Christian International. So now by this time, it's Friday afternoon. We meet Bill Hammond in his office. We're introduced. And I said that we are here. We came here obviously for the conference. It got blown away, but we decided we would come anyway because leaving Toronto, I was convinced that we were going to be at CI and at Pensacola the first people from the vineyard to be actually noticed. We may not have been the first, but that we would be at least the first ministers at Pensacola and possibly at CI. And he said, well, I can tell you about us at CI. You guys are definitely the first pastors, first ministers from the vineyard here. And he then went on to quote me without knowing it. I had told John Arnott that we were leaving. John Arnott was the pastor of the Toronto Airport Church. And I said, we're leaving and we're going down to CI and we're going down to Pensacola. I'm pretty sure we're going to be the first couple from Vineyard there from Toronto. And I feel as though God's using us in doing that to be a bridge specifically for CI, because what CI has, the Vineyard needs. And what the Vineyard has, CI needs, what Toronto has. And so there's a cross-pollination that's necessary. And partly what's on Sigurd and I is bridge building. And so I feel like that's what's going to happen when we go down there. So we sit there. He says, Ron, here's my heart. And he just basically used the words I just used. And he said, here's the other part. Visiting ministers come through here and they bring an anointing with them, and then they leave with it and it doesn't stay. My heart is that you'll do what you do and God will do what he does through you and he'll leave it here. Right? And I said, well, I gave him an Old Testament response. I said, well, that's my heart too, but obviously it's up to God. So let's find out what he does. But I just want you to know that's my heart too. So we had a mini Toronto airport that night. Bill Hammond's son is the pastor of that church. Bill is the senior ministry, but his son Tom is the pastor of that local CI church. Tom comes behind the platform, and I said, Tom, we had now been introduced to us, so we introduced ourselves. So it's just the three of us. And I said, Tom, I don't know why the Lord's telling me to do this, but if you're okay with it, I'm being told we need to pray for you before the service starts. So here we go, and we're praying for Tom. Well, Tom is having an event while we're praying there for him. And he's at a point where he's laughing uncontrollably and can hardly stand up. In the midst of that, and I'm not trying to glorify manifestations, don't get me wrong. In the midst of his reaction, the Lord said to take my suit coat off and put it on him as a signal that a vineyard anointing was going from a vineyard minister to a CI minister. So it was basically a symbolic gesture of that very bridge building that I was talking about earlier. And so we did. The head prophet in Christian International of all of the prophets is a woman by the name of Sharon Stone, or was at that time. And so here comes Sharon. I've never met her at this point. Comes up the hallway. I lied. I did. There was a conference up in Canada at a CI church that I attended, a prophetic conference. And anyways, so we had actually met, but nonetheless, so she didn't remember. So come up, and she sees Tom and how he's being impacted, and says, would it be rude of me to ask for some of that? And I said, well, let's see what God does. I don't control it, but sure. And so, boom, here we start. Sigrid starts praying for her, and I'm praying for both of them, and we're just going back and forth. Now I've lost control of both of them. Now Tom is going to lead the meeting, and he's in no condition to do so. And Sharon would be the next one in line to do that this is the annual convention we're talking about. And and she's in no condition to do so. But the service had to start. So here go the four of us onto the platform. Tom has a mic in his hand that's now on, and he's laughing like a hyena as he walks out from the back of the platform with the four of us. And Sharon can hardly stand up. The two of them look like they've just walked out of a bar and had been there for the whole afternoon. And so they're trying to describe what's supposed to happen on the night. Somehow he gets it out, and I preach. I finish the message, and I'm praying for the prophetic team. And then Tom looks, different people are looking, and they say, no, we have to shift what's happening. Why don't you pray for, and not Sharon, she's the international head prophet. Why don't you pray for the lead prophet of the house? And then he'll go and he'll pray he'll lay hands on the people in the back rooms, because what they did was you preached in the open session, and then people would go into various rooms and be ministered to prophetically. And so those people were still in the back rooms. And so I'm going to pray over the head prophet. He's up on the platform. I am now off the platform on purpose. I'm a good 30 feet away from him on purpose. And I turn and I start praying for him with my hand out. But again, I'm at least 30 feet away from him. As I'm praying over him, he starts jumping in place with his eyes closed. And as he just kind of jumps, maybe little jumps like that, right? Nothing big in terms of a manifestation, nothing like huge. When he does that, the whole place erupts like they've never seen this before out of him. And so, but I continued praying for him, and as I prayed for him, he wound up on the platform on his back. And the only, I guess, analogy to describe what it looked like, because he had um, Oxford's shoes on. The sound of it and the look of it was like a fish flopping in a boat that you just caught. And everybody, there was laughter, there was oohs, ahs, all different reactions, and I had no clue why they would be reacting, other than maybe it was because it was pretty demonstrative, and they may not have been used to seeing that. I came to find out later that this was another individual who'd been prayed over by some of the biggest names around, including Rodney Howard-Browne, and would just receive it like we were talking about earlier. And so the people were impacted because these were mostly CI pastors who knew this guy in the room. There was probably close to 1,000 of them, and they all knew the history of this guy. And so with what was happening to him, it was, for them, it was earth shattering. And so we leave him on on the platform, and they pull the people out of the back rooms, and we're praying for them. They're getting impacted. That meeting went on till 1:00 in the morning. And there's a reason why I'm saying all of this, right? So we leave. We find out, get a phone call, the date of the actual conference that was rescheduled. Remember, this was supposed to be a conference. The people that were there because they were there anyway. They were coming for the conference, right? Other people stayed away, but there was still about 1,000 people that showed up. And anyways, we find out about a month later. A month later, we return to this same building, and in a break, I had an opportunity to reintroduce myself to Tom. How you doing? What's been happening since? And he had no clue who I was. None. I told him about what happened that night. He didn't even have a memory of that night. The only two people in the whole building that remembered us was Sharon Stone and the prophet that I told you about on the platform.
So does this mean, again, I've been waiting to ask this for almost like an hour. Since your story with a hurricane, I never connected how is that connected with God making you like invisible? So since the story of since you guys left, I forgot what state was that.
We were
when
in
you had
Atlanta.
hurricane. So when you went from hurricane story to this story, is this by the end your actually conclusion, how even though you were serving God with all these people, to most of them, the reason they don't remember you because maybe they didn't even see you. That's
Exactly right. Exactly right. We got a phone call telling us, like I said, about the rescheduling of the conference. And the lady said, wait a minute, Ron Taylor, are you that Ron Taylor? And I said, "What do you mean by that?" She said, "Are you the Ron Taylor and Mrs. Taylor that ministered?" And she described the night. And I said, "You're only the third person that has any recollection of that night." She said, "I know." Okay, now you got my attention, right? She said, "I know. I was convinced that this place, when it happened that night, I was already convinced that they would completely forget who you were. I don't know why. I just had this really strong feeling that I needed to remember your name because I know that God dropped what we got using you and your wife. But I also at the time was convinced that somebody else, I call it, would get the blame. And you guys would be completely out of the loop and totally forgotten." And I said, "Well, we have been, or no, it hadn't happened yet." I said, "Well, I don't know, but I guess we'll just have to see when we show up." And she said, "Well, what you don't know is what happened after you left, right?" So that was Friday night. We get into the, she said, we get to the office on Saturday, the church office on Saturday morning. We opened the office at 9 o'clock, and everybody went home at 10 because nobody could sit in their chair without falling out of it, and nobody could operate the phone because nobody could figure out how to operate the phone. We were so incapacitated still, so everybody went home, and and then Sunday morning comes, and Tom is going to preach, but he's this is Sunday morning. That was Friday night that it started, and he's still drunk, slurring words, can't um, really get a lot of thoughts out. He was trying to tell the morning service, there was multiple services, I think two services at the time. He told the early service, trying to tell the early service what happened on the Friday night, and finally stopped and just said, "Oh, come on forward. I'll pray for you." And as he did, everybody was on the floor. And that ended the morning service. Everything else was ministry to the people on the floor. As that service closed, the second service is walking in. And without him saying anything, as they walked in, they were being impacted. She said that was Sunday. Monday, we went home early because it was early in the afternoon, but it was early because, again, we were really not able to. It was down to now we could answer the phone, but she said, "I'll give you an example for me. I had somebody with a name that was as simple as Bob Jones, and I could not say his name for the life of me. So I finally had to hang up, apologize, tell him I'd call him back, and hang up because I could not say his name." And so that was Monday. And Tuesday, it started to quieten down. We had a whole day. Wednesday, a gentleman from Rodney Howard Brown's ministry showed up for a conference, a 3-day conference. And she said that was the individual that they gave, that they now say started everything. And she said, "I know it's not about who started it, but I just want you to know that there's one person in the church that knows who God used." I was thankful later, embarrassed that time on the call, but thankful later that she actually took the time to say that, because that month later when we did show up and nobody knew us except Sharon Stone and the lead prophet, that impacted us. It really impacted us. How can something like that, so demonstrative, happen in an individual and be that impacted and not have any memory of it? Then the full circle happened years later, and this is only now a couple of years ago, about maybe 3 years ago.
I'm
Linda,
sorry,
who
we've been over 2.5 hours. We will have to
already?
close.
Whew.
Yes. Yeah. I just have a question before we go, why would God allow this to happen to people when they're just laughing and
Yeah.
their bodies just, jerking and they're moving, when they're not able to have ministry and service and sing to God, preach the word, when they're just laughing and their bodies are shaking? We don't see
Yeah.
anything like this in the Bible. Why would God do this when people cannot even make a phone call? And I mean, that would prevent the whole service day after day after day after day
Hmm.
from the word to be preached, for God to be, worshipped. So I just have struggles with, why would God allow this to happen?
It's a good question, and I think the honest answer is I don't know, but I do have some thoughts, and the I think the most important one for me is that for some people, um, it's a violent incursion by Holy Spirit into the life of someone who needs to be have it demonstrated for them that they're not in control. I can't tell you how many people were impacted, and in the midst of the impact, somebody reached over to them and said, "Here, let me help you up." And they would say, in the midst of violent stuff happening to them, and what comes out of them is, "Oh no, I got this." Oh, really? You've got this? Okay, okay, so come on, stand up. You got this. You got this. Stand up. And they couldn't. It was this whole control issue. I saw and then I saw pastors who I knew had severe control issues. These were people who were controlling pastors, okay? Very controlling and of their people as well. And um and what God did with it with some of them, um, he just dismantled them. And I'll leave it at that. But that was probably the biggest takeaway for me in terms of why. I think the largest part of that answer is I don't know, but that's a thought.
Fair enough. Brother Ron, it's been 2 hours and 35 minutes. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for so many interesting details of your, supernatural experiences with God, but also with the other side. I hope this will find some people encouraged, but also, wondering what is there more that we can receive from the Lord, not in a way to abuse or mimic, that we would, uh, you know, come up and want to, like we mentioned already, in some churches people want to mimic the work of the Holy Spirit, and then it's when churches look like circus. But maybe
Right.
and hopefully this will encourage some people to want to pray and be closer to God and be open-minded, like I need to be more open-minded. Okay, God, what do you want me to do? What is there another area of my heart and life that you want me to surrender, so you can cleanse me and lead me to another chapter of my life? And what is there to show me more when it comes to supernatural aspect? Without, I don't even have to fall, I don't have to laugh like,
Right.
uncontrollably. But what is there that you want to show me when it comes to the supernatural realm? What is there for me to see? What is there for me to understand, that you want to take me to another depth in this season of my life? So with that being said, Brother Ron, thank you once again so much. I know in Canada I can see the clock behind you, it's 9:40 almost. So thank you so much. I wish you a blessed end of this week and a blessed next week. I also want
And
to
to you,
thank
my friend.
everyone for sticking with us for 2.5 hours.
Just sticking
Next
with
week,
yeah, exactly.
yes, next week we're having another guest from Canada, and he's an archaeologist.
Excellent.
So we'll be having to, we'll be discussing some topics when it comes to archaeology, and I'm leaning more towards the Old Testament archaeology and stuff
Mm.
like that. But we'll see when I cover the material and write the outline. That being said, I wish everyone, a blessed evening, and to all of you, serve the Lord with all your heart, and spread the word about the channel. And I shall see you next Sunday. God bless.
God bless.